We've moved the needle quite a bit with Wall Street, I think, in the last few years here on Valiant Renegade, constantly chipping away at some of the questionable information that's been put out by Bob Iger and the Walt Disney Company. But there are some on Wall Street who still need a bit of guidance in the right direction, especially when they come out and lay the blame of Disney's woes on the wrong person. So listen up, Wall Streeters. This one is for you. Because if we're going to fix Disney's problems, then we need to start recognizing the proper source of those problems.
Renegade Online.
So this is a guy that was on, this is just in the last couple of days on Yahoo Finance. And he's talking about Disney as, you know, is Disney right now, how are we feeling on Wall Street about this, right? And of course, I need to preface this as usual with, we don't do financial advice here. I'm not playing this to elicit or solicit financial advice. I'm not playing this to suggest what people should or should not do. We're not doing that here. We are going to watch. We are going to make comments on this and discuss just some observations that we have. That's it. That's it, YouTube. And I know the audience gets this. I'm saying this for YouTube. Y'all don't understand how sensitive YouTube can get with things like this. All right, let's play this video.
Let's get to the stock you don't like. This one is quite interesting to me. It's Disney. This stock has also done well.
Let's get to the stock you don't like. Okay, here's Disney. So let me preface this with, there's a lot of things that this guy says that I agree with, that I not just in terms of his view on how the company's doing in streaming and things that have been said or done or not done. But there are some things that I will take issue with. And when you hear them, I think you'll know what they are, because we have got to clear the air about this. If we're ever actually going to fix the situation or hope that Wall Street can put some pressure on them to fix the situation, we've got to get certain key facts correct.
Over the past year, in part as the proxy battle has been going on. But in terms of why you don't like it, the first reason is quite interesting to me. Bob Iger came back to the company, but you say some of the decisions made by his predecessor, Bob Chapek, took the company down such a wrong path that they can't be reversed. What are some of those concerns?
Yeah.
Okay, so you already see where this is going, and I think you already know what my comments are going to be. So hang on.
I think Bob Iger, right, he's just a fabulous manager, and he was there for so long. But I even think for him, it's too little too late. The previous manager dug a hole strategically, and too much time spent and too much money spent, that I'm not sure that Iger is really the right kind of turnaround guy here. Iger's great at building businesses and being creative. Now he's coming in basically trying to pick up the pieces and clean it up. I'm not really quite sure, and I don't think shareholders might be either. Of course, we have Nelson Peltz who came in.
Now let me stop it there, because I need to, okay. He's riding that edge. There's stuff he says there that I'm with him on, right? And for Mr. Debick, look, Bob Iger's not a turnaround CEO. You and I are on the same page with this. But he's fallen into this trap. He has fallen into this trap of thinking that, or towing the line, that 11 months of Bob Chapek did all this. That's insane. That's clinically insane. And I don't mean that in an insulting way to this gentleman. He's just wrong. And it's because he's Wall Street analyst. He does not understand the entertainment industry, how it works. He does not understand, for example, the gestational period for a major Hollywood motion picture or even a Disney Plus series. And to the Wall Street people, when I say 11 months of Chapek, and you're going, oh, well, Chapek started in January of 2020. No. Back up. The 11 months is from Bob Iger's own mouth. Bob Iger, when he said, I had an 11-month interruption as the head of Walt Disney, that was a slip of the tongue. And he meant it. I mean, I don't think he meant to say it that way, but it came out. And what he meant by that was he was still there the whole time. Bob Iger had 10 months and 2 weeks to do what he wanted, and that was it. In 2020, he started. Iger didn't leave. He hung around all the way through the end of 2021 as a co-CEO. Chapek couldn't change a damn thing then. Everything was still going Iger's way. Then he left at the end of 2021. In the beginning of 2022, Iger was still the executive chairman of the board at the Walt Disney Company. He was still very much overseeing and controlling how the film and television studios were operating, which included the crap that was getting greenlit for Disney+. How do we know that? Because Bob Chapek didn't try or even start to change the system at Disney until January of 22 after Iger left as chairman. He didn't put Kareem Daniel in charge and change the distribution system, trying to change how the money was spent at Disney until January of 22, and Iger hated it. That started at 10 months and 2 weeks. So this idea that everything was fine and then Chapek came along and lit everything on fire by spending on Disney+. Dear Wall Street, let me make this abundantly clear. The stuff that has populated Disney+, that have cost a fortune, that sunk the world on streaming, all that crap was greenlit by Bob Iger. Get it right. And this is the problem. This is why Nelson Peltz didn't win back in April. Is because guys like this on Wall Street, Bob Iger has managed to convince these people, to fool these people into thinking that Bob Chapek did it all. I'm not saying Bob Chapek was a saint. I'm not saying Bob Chapek didn't make mistakes. We've talked about this many times. But to sit here and lay the doldrums of the Walt Disney Company on 10 months and 2 weeks of Bob Chapek's autonomy from under the thumb of Bob Iger is asinine. It is stupid. Absolutely stupid. The only thing that we know that Bob Chapek actually greenlit for sure was the Deadpool and Wolverine movie coming out shortly. He's the one that got Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds back together. That was him. So let's see how that does, and then we can blame Bob Chapek for that, which probably is going to be a success. But this idea that Iger was fine, but at the same time he also comes around and he says, but Iger's not the guy that can fix it. Chapek blew up everything, but Iger's probably not the guy who can fix it. He can build stuff. I'm sorry, I got to push back on that a little bit too, because it's not like Bob Iger can really build a whole lot. Bob Iger is good at spending lots of money. Bob Iger is really good at spending lots of other people's money, stockholder money. He buys things and then he tends to break them. Look at where Marvel is now, and look at where Star Wars has been for the last 10 years.
And Peltz who came in, and that made it even more difficult. So management is the big problem there. And I'm a real stickler for buying companies with excellent management, with visibility. This is a bit of a mess.
Which I would agree with. That's just basic common sense advice. Companies with good management do well. Duh.
That's when it comes to management.
And one of the messes you contend is what has happened with streaming and sort of the spending on content that the company has done. Is it not sort of paying off for them, do you think?
You know, it was a difficult, very competitive goal to try to compete with Netflix.
Yeah.
I mean, the monster, not just in the US, but globally. And that was really the whole strategic idea behind previous management. Let's make Disney this very competitive streamer against Netflix.
Again, when he says previous management, he's talking about Chapek again. I'm sorry. It was Bob Iger that Bob Iger's the one that threw the gauntlet down and said, we're going to become a streaming company, whether he realized he did or not. He's the one that decided to launch Disney+. He's the one that wanted to basically go head-to-head with Netflix. And again, to be fair, even to Iger, as I mentioned before, Wall Street was clamoring for this. Wall Street wanted to see sub-growth. Streaming was exciting to them at the time. It was a fool's dream. It was fool's gold. It was pyrite. It just wasn't real unless you were Netflix. It's much harder than what they anticipated, and they know that now, even though we said it years before they figured it out. Go back and check the videos and the live shows, folks. We've been warning them for a while. But this idea that, again, Chapek was the one that magically walked in and decided that everything was Disney+. No, he did push content, and they're talking about the one or two things where it's like, well, we're going to pull this out of the theater. We're going to put this on Disney+. Fine, because again, at the time, Wall Street was demanding that these companies do this. They wanted to see sub-growth. They wanted to see all this crap. It wasn't until a year later years later, matter of fact, that they decided maybe we need to make some profits from this stuff. Derp. Chapek, again, not perfect, but to his credit, like everybody else out there in the streaming space that was trying to get in on the game, was driving for the almighty subscriber at all cost. And again, less than a year of Bob Chapek did not create all this. Bob Chapek, he did not greenlight all these show budgets on Disney Plus, because y'all don't understand that it takes 2, 3, sometimes more than that, 4 years for a movie or a major television series to come to fruition from the time it is approved and greenlit or in development, gets greenlit, and then actually makes it to a streamer or a theater. That was not Chapek. That was Iger. It was Iger doing this. Y'all got to get it right, Wall Street. Because part of the problem with Disney is you guys, to be very fair, the big problem with Disney is you guys don't understand who did what. And you'll have got to get this right if you're actually going to fix it.
It's just like sending the Cleveland Browns to play, the Kansas City Chiefs, if you're a football person.
Yeah.
It just has not worked. And the problem is,
Ouch.
It doesn't look like it's going to work. And it's been very expensive and very time consuming. So that is sort of something I think Iger's going to have to wrestle with. And the question is, do they just cut their losses and move on? Or they try to turn it around?
Yeah, I mean, he has sort of tried to trim down the spending. But you don't think he's gone far enough?
Again, too little, too late, I think is the problem there.
Can we also go back and remind folks that everybody's talking about now the big budget cuts at Disney over the last 12 to 18 months since Iger came back? The cost cutting, the impairment charges, writing stuff down, getting rid of this and that, clearing the balance sheet in the books as best they can with a imperiled cash flow thanks to cord cutting and crappy movies and everything else. All of that was being put together when Chapek was still there. He was talking about major cuts, pulling back on spending for Disney Plus. Why? Because he could see the writing on the wall. And people are like, well, you still had shows coming out a year later or 2 years later. It's like, because they had already committed to it. They already had the contracts. They had greenlit this and that. And they were still trying to feel things out, but they were trying to start pulling back. Then Chapek was just jettisoned out the back door in a huge surprise move. And Iger came in, and then, quite honestly, when it came to the cost cutting and pulling back on budgets, he just basically took Chapek's playbook and ran with it. These people forget a lot of stuff. They need to go back. But again, Iger's a great communicator in that sense with these people because he can convince them that he can do no wrong. Basically. And that's the sad part. That's why we are where we are. And that's why people like Nelson Peltz have an uphill battle to do what he's trying to do.
And then valuation, just like we talked about with Booking, you think this stock is overvalued? Yeah,
it's growing at 5% a year, right? Compared to Booking at 20, but it's trading at 25 times earnings. Typically you want to have PEs equal to the growth rate. So 25.
I don't want to get too much deep in the weeds on this. He's basically talking about Disney's PE ratio being ahead of what he likes to see. I don't want to go down that road. It gets too much on the analytical side, and I don't want anybody to get confused because that can. I don't want to go into stock advice there. So I'm gonna skip past that a little bit.
Change the business strategy meaningfully, and things get better. The other is it becomes a takeover candidate, which, I mean, one of these seems a lot likelier than the other one, at least to me.
It's a behemoth to take over. I mean, it would take a ton of money and somebody who wants to, get involved in that mess. But, when we think about, okay, what would make it appealing? Yeah, takeover, hard to imagine who the acquirer would be. I think it's a change of strategy and a significant and dramatic one. I'm not sure current management, Iger, is really up for that. It's going to cause a lot of conflict.
And he's not. We know he's not because Bob Iger's very set in his ways. He wants the Disney studio system to run exactly like he's been running it for the last several decades, basically letting creatives run and do whatever they want with budgets, distribution, everything else, put creatives in charge of everything, whereas Chapek was trying to put a gap in between them to where somebody like Kareem Daniel was going to be a check on the studios in terms of spending, budget, and distribution. I mean, we won't know if it will ever have really worked because there was barely any chance, if any real chance at all, for it to have been put into a process. We would have had to have seen what would have happened with it over the course of years, not a couple of shows in a couple months. But that being said, it's a change in strategy. What are you talking about? The problem is that, like I said, the change in strategy is not going to happen. Iger's there. He's not the guy to change it. He wants what he wants. And like we've said many times, if the Walt Disney Company puts in place a Dana Walden, for example, which I personally believe is probably the most likely candidate at this point to take over Bob Iger, you're just going to get more of the same. It's not going to change. It's not going to get any better. It's going to be Bob Iger 2.0, but with blonde hair and boobs.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.